Welcome to episode 9 of our screencast series on building a social networking site using the ColdFusion on Wheels framework. In this episode, I'll show you how to add a custom URL for your user profiles using a feature of Wheels called routes. Alright, now we're looking at my profile page again on the social network. And if you remember, we had set it up in the user controller, the profile action, and it expects a key, which is the primary key. And this is the standard Wheels URL. But if we go to our user/register action, you may recall that we had set up the profile address with this URL mask. So what we're going to show you is how to match those up so that we can show, if we look at the database, we want to show their URL ID instead of their primary key ID, which isn't as helpful, and hey, it's a social network. People like customizing things like their profile URL. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our code, and in the config folder, let's open routes.cfm. And in here, we're going to set up what's called a route for this. And what a route does is it allows you to define URL patterns that are beyond the Wheels conventions, so that you can do things like these vanity URLs. You'll see that there's already a route in here. We'll worry about that one later. So let's build one for this. So what you do is you call the add route function, and it takes several parameters. First, give it a name. I'm going to call it user profile. It can be anything I want, but it should be something that makes sense within the context of your application. Next, you define a pattern, and within this parameter, you basically tell what URL pattern you want and what parameters it can accept and where. So if we go back and look at this, we want something that says profile and then accepts a parameter for that URL ID. So that's what we'll do. We'll do profile / and then any parameters you want to define, you put in square brackets. So let's do URL ID to keep it consistent with what's in our database schema. And then lastly, all that you need to do is define which controller and action this pattern should forward requests to. So we want the user controller, and then let's go for the profile action again. So with this URL ID in place, that will automatically become available in the param struct within our controller and view. So let's go ahead and change things up a little in our controller. If you remember, we do have a profile action, but it's expecting params.key, which is that primary key ID, and we're now instead going to find it by URL ID. One way that we can do this is doing a find one and passing it where, and we can say URL ID equals, and then in quotes we can put params.URL ID, and that should all be working just fine. So let's try running that. Since we changed something in the config folder, remember that we need to reload the application. So I think mine was Chris D. Peters, and let's go ahead and reload it. So I can take the reload off just so you can see how it works fully. And hey, look, it's pulling up my record, even though I didn't pass it a primary key. It found it where, the URL ID was equal to that. What's cool is there's another shortcut where we can use what are called dynamic finders, and what we can do is call a dynamic function that's just a little more readable than find one where this equals this. So we can say find one by URL ID and just pass the URL ID instead of having to write all of that where clause out. So let me reload this, and as you'll see, it still pulled up the correct thing. So here's another URL ID that we can test just to make sure it's working. So here's Minnie Mouse, and hey, look, it pulled up her profile. So that was pretty much an introduction to routes. For more information about the ColdFusion on Wheels framework, visit us at cfwheels.org.